First of all, we're really privileged to be here spending time with each of you today. Thank you to Expedite and to Christian and the team for inviting us to do so. When we discussed the opportunity to participate, it was a once-in-a-lifetime thing for us from a timing point of view. What we're going to talk to you about today, we conceived a couple of years ago, but we did a soft launch 1 year ago, almost exactly, and Bertie will tell you a story in a moment. Bertie's the man with the hat, who will be talking tomorrow about what significance that date has to him too. But on June the 8th last year, we launched for the first time a concept around interaction optimization, around connected teams. And the year has been very kind to us, and in that year as a technology company, we have put together a solution. And rather than talk to you about that solution, we're hoping at some point during the course of the next 2 days, you're going to have the opportunity to try it. So have many of you already downloaded and completed your, can I just get a show of hands, your profile report? Most of you, that's great. And there is a button on there which allows you to share it with this group. How many do you know have pressed that taken that opportunity? Slightly fewer, but that's okay. So that's the way we've witnessed it generally. So you'll have an opportunity to play, and I encourage many of you. There are some instructions on your chair. Please do, if you haven't already, share. And then it's a wonderful way of starting conversations in an informal way over the course of the next couple of days. So very quickly, Thomas, as an organization, has been running for over 40 years, and we were one of the founding partners in psychometric assessments originally. We have offices in 58 countries around the world. We have 10,000 clients, and we use our technology to help organizations make better people decisions. That was our origin. But we saw an opportunity, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about that. Lots of changes going on in the world of work, both from an employee experience point of view, but also from an employee value proposition. And so we've done some fairly exciting things, and hopefully that will become clear over the course of today. So, just so you know that it's not entirely irrelevant, Expedite also did a survey, you may remember, before you all. There are places up front if you'd like to sit down. Yeah. I'll sell them by the end of it, they'll be full. You did suggest that this was an area of interest for you, so everybody that was asked suggested that. There were key focus areas in HR tech and in AI, and I think we bridged that gap a little bit today. We're going to be right out of the weeds on technology. We'll be talking about the principles that guide the life of a CHRO today, and we'll be citing a number of different sources with a view to bringing it all together around the theme of connection towards the end. So I'll pass you over very quickly to Jenny to introduce herself.
Perfect. Well, really lovely to be with you all today. Some familiar faces as well, which is always nice. My name's Jenny Drimmer, and I lead the commercial team at Thomas. But my background is almost 25 years now in the HR advisory and technology space. So I spent almost 20 years at CEB in the HR practice, which became Gartner. So as we talk about evolving and change management, very topical. I started off actually in the research and advisory space, so content and deep research is very close to my heart as well. I moved on to a few different HR technology companies, most recently running the Coursera EMEA business, so very aligned on the L&D space as well, and really excited to be with you all today. Luke, how about you?
So my background is this. I've led a number of companies, but I started off as an AI practitioner and psychologist back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I've been working in technology businesses and data businesses for the last 32 years. And I've been at Thomas for about 2 years. So that's our vanilla introduction. That's the classical one you'd hear, this is who I am. So why don't we just try a little bit of using our tool as well to give you another dimension of who we are. And maybe, Jenny, what am I like?
What are you like? Well, I think there's two things really that stand out about Luke. He's outgoing and he's direct. So what that means in terms of how he shows up is a lot of energy and also highly empathetic as well. What's interesting, as you'll see, is we've got fairly similar profiles in a lot of ways. And so one thing that the system helps me with is also reminding me and giving me prompts to actually not just take that energy, but to bring it down to concrete action, to move things forward and to document that as well. So that's been really key to me. And I don't know, how about for you?
Well, Jenny is a woman of action, if you can't tell that already. So this profile here at the right is that says it's about doing things, really doing things. And Jenny never stops, absolutely relentless, and I think she's, it's an absolute joy to work with. But I think one of my jobs is to help slow Jenny down just occasionally, just to pause and reflect as actions are taken, because she can see a solution in any bog of mess and muddle. And I also have a tendency, you can see here at the bottom, to potentially frustrate Jenny. So I will always want to have a chat about everything, and Jenny just wants something to happen. So part of what I have to do is calm down, give some space to Jenny so that Jenny can get her point across and make sure that the actions are taken that motivate her and help our business. So this is how we use our system every day. Everybody in our company uses our system in this way to help form better connections. So we're going to go into looking at what's happening in the world today. Now, you all know this, and you're going to hear it probably from multiple different presenters, what's going on that's affecting your lives. So we've tried to take a slightly different angle. Some of it may be familiar, but hopefully some of these sources will be beneficial to you for material later. And I'm just checking, organisers, are these slides available to share at the end of it for everybody that's here? Christian, I can't see where you are. I saw you earlier. Well, if not, we're happy. Yeah, we're happy to send those on. So I thought we'd start with one slide from me, just looking at the priorities from the CEO lens. And I was at an event on Friday speaking to 125 CEOs from the top UK technology businesses, of which there were many multi-billion organizations. And I was talking about the power of leadership and connection to drive this forward. And what's really interesting is many of the CEOs don't see themselves as having any issues at all, because they're really, really good at communication, and they're really good at building networks, and they're really good at making people do the things they want them to do for the good of the company. But that doesn't follow the further you go through an organization. So if you look at in the US, there's a huge drive still over the last 4 quarter calls on the S&P calls in the United States. Those are the 3 biggest topics that people are still talking about. They still, part of the agenda is about how do we save money, how do we make efficiency gains, how do we enhance our productivity. And yet, in the European Union, and many of us represent that, UK, so no more, but we have many offices in the European Union, Switzerland again, not there, but we also understand that the general trends across the European landscape are slightly slower. So we're all feeling that pressure. We all want the productivity, but we're not getting the growth necessarily to match with that. So everyone's looking very hard at the money that they can save. And the challenge we have is that employees are still feeling this, right? They really feel it, and they're saying categorically, this is the CEB and Gartner sources, nearly half of them say, just don't put any more on my plate. Don't give me any more pressure, because you're asking to squeeze more, but I can't take any more. And that's the sort of situation we're in, as we know. And it's not just attributed, we all love to, and I know you won't do this, but I hear a lot of my peers talking about how the young ones can't handle it. I find that very irritating. It's all of us at one level. It's not just the young ones that are not wanting to work so hard or haven't got the resilience of the older generations. I think those are nonsense scripts that need to be debunked. But the reality is they are all struggling.
Yeah. And again, I don't think that's unique to any of us, right? Both as people leaders, people managers, leaders of the people function within the business. I mean, I was having coffee with some revenue leaders last week, and across different functional leadership, there's this real feeling of, and it's only June, for heaven's sake, it's only June, right? The world out there feels really different. And I think for all of us in the HR leadership side of things, we are ultimately accountable for leading the charge when it comes to people within our business, and the challenges are acute. So with that, let's ground a little bit in where we are and our starting point for HR leaders this year. And a lot of these are going to look very similar. So again, HR and leadership development, almost a perennial here on the list. Topics around organizational culture, and again, the kind of holistic well-being side of what we do. HR technology, as Luke shared earlier, a key one for individuals in this group. Change management, again, another oldie but a goodie, and of course, career management and internal mobility. 2 things that are interesting to me here that really jump out, and actually a third that I'll get into in a moment. Firstly, all that money you're spending on manager and leadership development, guess what? The data shows that 20% of your team currently managing people don't want to be. So no matter how much money you put into them, you're not going to move the dial realistically. And I think the bad news is we don't have any colleagues, I realize, from functions like finance with us today, but our budgets right now are disproportionately lower than our cross-functional support function peers to do this. So we've got this incredible pressure between what we're being asked to deliver and the resources that we're delivering that with. And I see some heads nodding here, and that's not even talking about the size of our teams and the resources that we have within the function from a people perspective. And so I'm going to admit it, I'm a woman of a certain age, and sometimes I do question my own memory, as I'm sure some of you may relate to. And so as I looked at that, I also thought, surely this is not 2024. This looks and feels really familiar. I'm having deja vu. Am I gaslighting myself? I don't know if you can do that, but I actually did think that I might be doing that. And I looked with my research head on for data to really give myself a grounding point. And I found the list of HR challenges for leaders like yourself that looked extremely familiar. This isn't 2023. It's not 2022. It's 2012. It's 2012. Good heavens. How is that possible? What's been going on with all the change, and we're still talking about these same topics? Why are we talking about them and not really addressing root cause and getting to the solutions required? And my question for all of us today is, again, are we going to be change leaders within the organization or change laggards? And it was interesting because we were over in the US for the Josh Bersin conference recently, and I thought one of your peers put it beautifully when they talked about if your business is not changing at least as fast as the outside world, it's on the path to obsolescence. And that, I think, is the huge challenge that we have. And again, as Luke will talk about, all that's coming down the pike as we talk about AI and technology is only making that more difficult.
Thank you.
Ooh, still me. Sorry, that's the problem with not seeing next slide. So what you'll see about that as well is before we talk about technology, and Luke alluded to this earlier when we talk about younger employees, it's one thing to talk about CEOs and HR. Let's talk about our staff, because that's why we all do what we do. And I thought Gartner in their research put it really beautifully when they talked about this concept of the human deal framework. And as we've all seen and heard, not only with young staff, but across the board, people are expecting and asking for different things from us as employers. So if you take that first point, radical flexibility, we know the vast majority of people are loving hybrid working. For those of us that are mandating time back in the office, we've seen high-profile examples of the challenges that this caused. I love this data point. 77% of people prefer a 4-day week. Who the heck are the 23% that don't, I want to know. I don't understand that personally. I'm just saying, Luke, big supporter of this. And again, secondly, that personal growth side of things. What we know with growth is companies are much flatter than they were before. So the upward opportunity and title progression isn't always there, but there is and needs to be skills progression because we know the skills deficit that we're facing in the market. Holistic well-being. Can you imagine 10 years ago sitting around talking about holistic well-being as something employees expect? What a shift in our ways of working and the expectation of our staff from us. Shared purpose. This is really interesting as we pivot into the conversation today on teams. Incredibly, again, speaking about younger staff, 71% of Gen Z employees would actually move roles if they could have a better and greater positive impact in a different business. Think about that. And then lastly, I've got 2 young boys. They're going to be in the place of work within 5 years, the older one. Deeper connection. Deeper connection. People are looking for work as community, as their tribe, as their place to be accepted and understood. And I've got some really bad news because I think the data would indicate we are failing them very acutely right now. In fact, half of employees right now feel that they are treated with fairness and empathy at work. Fairness and empathy. Surely that is foundational stuff. If my older son goes to a workplace and is not treated like that, I'd say get out of there immediately. Secondly, you'll see that only around 50% of employees trust their organization. No kidding. How can we be surprised by that? And then you take that toxic mix and you try to put change management on top? No wonder we've got a problem. And so with that, I will now turn to Luke to share a little bit.
It was interesting because thinking about, so expatriate roles, who's here has been an expatriate or currently is an expatriate with their company? Show of hands. Quite a lot, quite a large number. The desirability of expatriate roles has dropped dramatically in the last 3 years. Now there's three motivating reasons behind that. One is the offers aren't the same. So back in the day when I had them, they were preposterously generous, right? So here, have a flat and have some extra money. And no, you need some more clothes for that different weather temperature, which is exactly the same as the one you're leaving. Here's our standard policy and here's our chunk of cash. So first of all, we're not doing those. Secondly, the world's a little bit more anxious. People aren't sure where they want to be. You know, there's a bit of nervousness collectively. And the third thing is that people quite like what they've ended up with. This hybrid working model, this working from home flexibility. I could do that job. I don't need to move to Shenzhen. I can do that in London. You know, I'll work a few odd hours, but I'll be okay. So the world of even those kind of standard roles that might have exhibited themselves or arrived a while ago just aren't happening. And who knows about BANI as opposed to VUCA? Who talks about BANI in their organization? Okay, so it's fascinating. So VUCA, everyone's been familiar with VUCA, everyone's nodding. It's the theory of the 90s. We've carried it for 20 years. It's been volatile. Everyone knows what that means. BANI has been around since 2016 and it's only just taken off. It was theorized in a book in 2016. I encourage all of you to read the base research. But in 2022, it started to just get a little wave, a little bit of a nervousness. And I think about what 22 had in it, right? February, March time, 22, certain stuff happened. So BANI is brittle. This is the societal vibe that we're living in. An organization that's brittle, that's anxious, that's non-linear, i.e. change doesn't just happen in a continuous thing, it just happens all the time and in bursts and then it stops. And it's finally, the I, incomprehensible. So that's the world that we're working in, right? It's pretty uplifting, isn't it? Brittle, anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible. But if you think of that backdrop, no wonder we struggle to work out what plan we're going to deliver in 2024, let alone 25, 26, because we don't know what we don't know at rapid pace. We don't know which country's arguing with which country, which technology is going to displace which role, et cetera, how much money we're going to have. And that's not just, you know, a sense. That is a real, tangible, palpable thing that we're living through. And Burstyn talks a lot about this sort of age of intelligence that we're in now, this post-industrial, discontinuous age, where everything just comes in fits and bursts. But if you roll it back up to BANI, you get a really interesting sense of why all of these things are in constant turmoil. And it isn't going away. I think someone said the other day, I'm just waiting, Luke, for you to slow down so that everything can go back to normal. Well, then it's probably not the right company to be in, or you're not in the right role. That is not going to happen. Change is not going to stop. It's going to get faster. Go back to that quote that Jenny referenced earlier. You know, change, any company that's changing slower than the world outside of them is on a route to obsolescence. It's fascinating, but it's true. So it's almost asking a lot of us as well as HR practitioners, because traditional roles were about control, weren't they? You know, well, I know you know this and everyone's talked about how much transition has to happen. But when I was in the States 2 weeks ago meeting CHROs from a number of the US conglomerates, I was amazed to find many of them weren't CHRO or HR practitioners. They'd come over from communications, from business development, from marketing, and they'd become CHROs because they were surrounded by people that knew what they were doing in their functions. And then they layered in, okay, I need to change this value proposition. I need to change my offer. So they were thinking like marketers. And it's a really big ask for a lot of us on how we make that step up and change. One fascinating one, as a digression, organization, CPG, global, 1 million staff, had 40 tiers in their business in 2021. Right? Not uncommon. I'm sure many of you have many tiers. They've ended up, at the beginning of March this year, they have 5 now. They've squeezed their entire function from 40 to 5 because they want mobility. And in 31 sessions at the Burson event, 30 of them were on talent mobility and AI. 30 out of 31. Nothing about acquisition. Nothing about how do I find the talent. It's about how do I keep it? How do I nurture it? How do I love it? How do I make it successful so that we can build great businesses? And I won't need to say anything. I'm a massive AI fan. I've run 3 businesses that were driven by machine learning and AI. It's coming. We'll show you a little bit for fun at the end. It's inevitable. Most companies have a charter of some description they're forming, but the different attitudes to adoption are remarkable. And what I will say is an example of a company, 800,000 people, they were the first global license of ChatGPT. They took it for every staff member in November 22. So you imagine that, it's only been out for 4 weeks, and they had a global rollout, untried 3.5 before 4 even came out, for just to have a play and see what they could do for productivity. That's that same company that a year later got 5 job bans instead of 40. So, AI is not the same for everybody. Who's read the Better Up research? Has anyone read anything about pilots and passengers? Have you heard this terminology? Okay, so the concept is there are pilots that are using it every day in their lives, and there are passengers that are sitting back and are feeling a little bit overwhelmed by the speed of this new technology. The study that they conducted with Stanford University ran until April this year. They studied 10,000 people in 18 vertical industries across 30 countries, so a very, very big sample size. What they discovered was only 28% of people are pilots. Probably doesn't surprise you, but maybe the productivity of those people does. Okay, so what they discovered was the pilots are infinitely more productive, and the corollary is they're loyal too, because they're excited, they're getting given tools to use. So if anyone's wondering about whether they should or shouldn't, as the argument says, HR needs to lead this as part of its discipline. I saw these rise of the AI officer, chief AI officer, in loads of companies over the last month or two, but it's where they report. Is that sprung out of the CHRO office? Because you have a voice at the most critical part of the company's agenda right now. The talent is the agenda, but the talent and AI cannot be separated right now because there's going to be so much displacement.
Thank you. Perfect. So just to summarize before we move on to the next section here, I think it's very clear, hopefully. I've seen lots of cameras out, so I hope that we're all on the same page. Work is very different in 2024, and it's only going to be more of that as we move forward as well. As we've talked about, employee expectations have changed hugely. Productivity pressures, as we know, continue apace and are not going to be slowing down. The skills shortages, which I realize we've spoken a little bit less about today, but again, data shows top agenda item for CEOs globally. And then, of course, as Luke talked about, AI is also redefining roles of today and for the future. And we put this Josh Bersin quote here because I thought it was really good, this idea of needing to hoard our talent, invest in that talent and in their productivity to redevelop and redeploy them, while at the same time also driving much more human-centered leadership. And that's a theme that we'll pick up on over the course of the discussion. And just going back to some of your comments, Luke, there's a lot of new insight coming out. I don't know if folks have seen that we are moving from the great resignation period to the great stay, where people are risk averse, they want to grow within their business, they don't want to move somewhere else and be the last in and the first out. So big changes afoot across the piece. So let's talk a little bit in the light of all of that about how we can actually manage these changes as a source of good and evolution, and maybe revolution in some cases, not only for our businesses, but also critically for our teams as well. And as I said, I'm a lover of L&D. I was at Coursera in my last role, but I do want to start with this because L&D, as we all know, is a huge part of our budgets. So quick show of hands, it's after lunch. I realize also we got the after lunch slot, so I'm hoping you guys are with us still. Quick show of hands, there's only 3 options, so don't hold out. How much do you think was spent on L&D globally last year? Last year. 100 billion, more or less. 100 billion, more or less. Anyone? Any takers? No? US dollars. Thank you on the currency prompt. 200 billion, more or less. US dollars. It's a sad auction. 200 billion. Everyone's holding out for the third option. 300 billion or above. Got a lot of non-voters in here. I've seen you. You're right. 366 billion US dollars. If anyone can tell me the ROI, the consistent ROI of that spend, please catch me at coffee. I've been working in a space long enough. I used to work on a solution that tried to prove that, which is still out in the market. So again, that is a huge amount of money. And so the question I have for us is really, are we confident that by going at it in the usual way with iterations of our approaches, looking at things from manager development to performance management to wellness to remuneration, are we actually seeing returns from that? Are we actually moving the dial? How confident are we in our solutions achieving what we need to? And critically, are the solutions actually getting to root cause? Because without that, you can spend all the money you want to, but if you've got 20% of your managers not wanting to people manage, good luck training them up on that. And I know, Luke, you had some comments as well on the tech side.
Just on the tech side. So it's interesting going on Jenny's slide, and I know many of you will have many of these tools, may even be looking for these tools today, and they clearly add value, right? They clearly add value. Someone described it to me as, I need to pop this in, stir it up, and I have a committed employee base. You know, throw that software product, and we'll all tell you that with all of those, our technology is going to solve the world, right? Well, that's the story you'll hear every time from any technology organization. It's the panacea to all of your issues. We're going to take a line of argumentation that none of these is not worth doing. They're clearly worth doing. But an example I had given to me on Friday from a CEO said, I did some 360s on my leadership team the other day. And I said, oh, that's very progressive. How did it go? Thinking that's perfectly normal. He said, awful. They were broken. He said they hated it. And I thought, well, that's a really interesting example of going to something, assuming that you've done the basics, right? So some of the solutions we're talking about here, as brilliant as they are, they're in weird order. People put one of those in, but they haven't put the other one in first. There is a sequence, a logical sequence to build utilization. So we know what the hygiene factors are, getting our payroll and our, blah, blah, blah. But actually, the important thing is that you think about which one you're going to do first. And we're going to introduce to you, guess what, yet another product idea today. Not surprising, which we think kind of sits ahead of some of the initiatives that you'll see today. But in the way that the 360, I said to them, well, what have you done before? What did you gear up? Did they know each other? Did they trust each other? How long have they been together as a team? None of it had happened. It just went straight to 360s, and we know that's a disaster. We need to think of that as a bit of an example on how it might work from a technology adoption point of view when you're expecting 800% improvement in employee ROI and you don't get it. You could ask yourselves whether you've done it sequentially correctly. And so this is the result we're getting, right? So you've put all this stuff in. We've spent 366 collectively, 366 billion, and yet that's the result from the State of the Global Workplace last year. Now, it's annoying, actually. They're not annoying, but the conference is today. Gallup's 24 data comes out on Wednesday. So I was trying every route I could to give you the first sneaky, illegal look at the 24 data, but I couldn't get it. So you'll all see it on Wednesday. But I encourage you to look back at the State of the Global Workplace report that comes out on Wednesday. I'm pretty sure Gallup's going to be pushing it everywhere and anywhere for the next 3 months. But it's really good data. But that's the result of our spend, right? And that's hard, it's tough. It's not every organization, we know that, but it's in many places collectively, that's the issue we're facing.
All right, which leads us back to, let's find a path out of this, right? We don't want to feel too relentless in our after lunch spot. I think the key thing is, again, how are we going to look at the problem from a different angle? So for us, we really have been trying to understand, how do we progress? How do we move forward in a different and kind way? And I'll have you share a couple of fun examples, Luke, as well, that I think are a good starting point.
Just for fun. So let's imagine what connected teams look and feel like. So this is a business, isn't it? They made a huge amount of money for certain publishers and others. So over 8 years, those of you that know the story of the Beatles, I'm sure you do. It's in, who's read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers book back in the day? The book, right? At least for 6 months of dinner parties. The book of the idea that you just worked extra hard and all of a sudden you got accidentally good at something. The reality is they did 3 years, hard graft, 15 hours a day gigging in the Kaiserkeller in Hamburg, and all of a sudden they became brilliant, right? All of a sudden the magic happened. But this was a team that literally every single part that they played in the band was interchangeable with the exception of the drums. Every one of them played each other's guitars, someone would sing, someone would write the lyrics, and they were a perfectly honed team that produced more singles, number ones, and album longevity than any band in history because they knew and connected well together. Give you another more recent example. Any football fans that happen to know this guy? Yeah, he's nodding away. I mean, what an outstanding achievement. For those of you who don't know, this was a team that until the very last game in the Europa Cup final didn't lose a game all season. First time in history, anywhere in Europe in the top flight that had ever happened. And this is I wouldn't call it a second-rate team, but this is a team of, there are no superstars in there. There's no big ticket salaries. There's no famous manager that had managed 1,000 clubs before. But what they did was unprecedented. And when they were interviewed, they talked about the spirit of the team, the connection inside the team, the trust they exhibited in each other, the belief that built, and the output that generated. An absolutely unprecedented result, and none of those stars, and it really was something to behold. So, Jenny.
So for us, our starting point and our thesis is really at that level of the team, because we know, and we see this from the data, that connected teams are more productive.
Oh, I'm going to take it back. It's my favorite slide. So we know this, but we can quantify it too. Right, so we've got stuff from Harvard, as you can see. We're not going to cite too much of it. But we've got really big impacts here in connection. What does it feel like to be part of a connected team? Those of you know when you're in a great team, don't you? Remember, hands up who is in a great team right now. Yeah, so not everybody, right? So we're not all in great teams. But those of us that are, it feels materially different. There's something there. There's some little je ne sais quoi, but it actually has a huge amount of impact in productivity and, of course, growth. But we all know that when we feel trusted, we're more innovative. So, you know, the disengaged individual, I say to people is, well, people, you know, you've got that 3 clusters. They're either actively disengaged, kind of who cares, or very engaged. And it's the ones that you worry about, the who cares group, right? The floating through the day. They're all being carried through. We've all had those crappy jobs that we just find every day to be a chore. Now, we'll all have a day like that once every month or so, but it's not the same as feeling that feeling in the pit of our stomach, not wanting to be in that role. And every time someone says, hey, have you got a good idea? Maybe, but they're not going to volunteer it. They're sure as hell not going to volunteer to deliver whatever it is. So connected teams have a huge amount of implication for innovation. And if we go back to Bani, what's the big problem we're facing today is constant change. So what do we need? Innovation. And specifically, and this goes back 1955. So if anyone hasn't read that paper by Will Schutz, he went into the US Army and he looked at all of the different platoons of Army soldiers over the years, and he could identify, it's a beautiful psychological paper, it's foundational in its structure, that high-performing teams are 25% more productive. We've got tons of research, 21, 23, 75, depends on the research. But we've known that for 70 years, and yet we've tried to solve it in lots of different ways without what we would contend looking at the foundational problem. And so connection, we have a team of psychologists, 50 psychologists around the world, and we've been working with hundreds of different consumers, individuals, to establish what connection is, give it some tangibility, right? And we think there are 6 facets inside the concept of connection. We're developing a 3-minute profile opportunity to define people's sense of connection at any one time. And that will be in part of what we're going to show you later. So the measures include things like collaboration, things like identity, you know, how aligned are we, how appreciated are we, how much opportunity do I have to make a solid contribution, how much trust am I given, how trusted do I feel, how much do I trust the colleagues around me, and how much does the organization look after me. Now this is proprietary, this is Thomas thinking. It's something, no one's ever created a measure of this, and we think it's critically important to be able to objectively state how connected an individual is, and to establish that fairly quickly so that you can look at the kind of interventions that you need to do in order to create that innovative, productive, dynamic, engaged workforce.
And so when we think about the unlock and the opportunity here, the irony is it's extremely simple in ways, and it's been looking at us right in the face for quite some time. We at Thomas believe that understanding oneself is at the core of everything. And if you think about it, going back to the conversation earlier, making sure that every individual is respected, connected, and understood within the organization as a starting point. Because what we know from the evidence base very clearly is that in doing that, you can build more connected teams with a baseline of trust and respect, where ultimately people feel connected, people feel energized and engaged. Through that, you've got more thriving and high-performing teams that want to stay and be part of that. And ultimately, you get into a nice flywheel with better contribution and productivity, and ultimately driving team performance and corporate performance off the back. And so again, we know that very clearly. That's been reiterated several times, including from from Mercer in this case, where we know where people can bring their full self to work, there's a huge impact for them in terms of their trust and productivity and ultimately engagement within the business. And so let's talk a little bit about how we can do that and what that means in practice. And I know that we're conscious of time as well. We want to go from a world where people say, and I'm sure this looks very familiar, I don't know people. I don't know folks around me, and I don't fit in here. And again, onboarding in a remote world has only made that problem more acute, to a world where people say, I understand myself, my peers understand me, and from that, we can learn from each other and we can flex to each other as well. We want to go from a place where many people still are saying, as we've seen from the data, my manager doesn't get me, they don't really care about me, to a place where people can say, you know what, my manager knows how to work with me and get the most out of me, and equally I can operate and work and flex to them. Equally, I'm sure we've all seen this day to day, a place from folks saying, you know what, gosh, this person drives me crazy, I can't work with them, to a place where they say, you know what, we've got different profiles, and I can empathize with that and flex myself to work with them in a productive and constructive way. And ultimately, let's go to the last place, from a place where we feel like, you know what, work sucks, and let's be honest, too many of our team feel that still right now, to a place where people feel connected, energized, and able to contribute within their organizations in a consistent way. So with that, for us, we really feel that the understanding and the key baseline for achieving this is that understanding of oneself and each other as well, and using that as a foundational build to so many of our initiatives, as Luke was talking about earlier, within HR.
There was a, while Jenny's going to get back, she's going to go on the screen. We're going to show you our AI. We're going to ask questions about each other that are real time. So we've prepared a couple just because of speed and time and respect for you. But I got the FT on the plane today, and there was a quote here from the Chartered Management Institute, and it asked 2,000 employees whether they felt valued and appreciated at work. Did anyone see that? It said nearly 3/4 of those who worked with an effective manager said they did, but only 15% of people that worked for an ineffective manager felt that way, right? So the impact of a good manager. And one of the things we've got to realize is not all managers can be good all of the time, and even good managers lapse, right? What we believe is important, and why we created the solution that we're happy to talk to you about over the course of the next couple of days, is to make up for those gaps, those moments, those lapses. And we've been piloting it with over 90 companies for the last year to try and refine the solution. And we signed a major launch deal at the end of last month with Conagra in the United States for their whole company to use this AI tool to be able to embrace better employee communication as one of our launch partners for that solution. But you'll see now, when you look at this opportunity, we have, oh, there you are, Jenny's already asked a question of our AI. So how can I best communicate bad news? She doesn't do it very often, but it's important to know how. So the guidance that you can see, I won't read it, but it's taking my profile and it's taking the view from Jenny and suggesting some things that she might want to do to give me with my profile a bit of bad news. So I might fail it. Luke values direct interaction. Have it face to face because he might find it difficult to focus on details for an extended period of time. That's probably a fair challenge. Okay, so you're going to do another one. What's the question, Jenny?
So how can I get Luke not to lead with his point of view in a meeting, which grounds the perspective of the larger room?
Okay, how should I do that? I really need to know this one, so how should I do that?
So again, highlighting the independence, autonomy, and just giving me a few flags in terms of how best to work with you. And I think for me, it's been really helpful. I use this quite a lot going into more difficult conversations as well, especially with people I may not work with all the time. Yeah. So I'm highly direct. So I liked Luke shared his questions about me ahead of time. So let's see. So you were asking, oops, sorry.
So Peter Drucker, but while you're doing that, yeah. Peter Drucker asked a series of, this is, we're wrapping in two. So Peter Drucker asked a series of, every time he ran a management training session, he'd ask the team, have you got any dead wood in your team? Does everyone know the phrase dead wood? So people that aren't contributing. And he'd watch the people leading up. He said, how many were they dead wood when you hired them? Right? Really, really good qualifying question, is it? Were they dead wood when you hired them? And that's the reality, is we can have brilliant people that do not flourish. That team of Leverkusen, some of those players were awful with other teams. They were rejected, given away on free transfers, but came together and under great leadership. They formed a wonderful team dynamic, and obviously the results followed. So, you know, we're really talking about an opportunity for managers as much as anything else, just to become more skillful. Slow down a little bit, prepare fractionally before they have a conversation. So what should I do with Jenny? Yeah. Focus on more products more deeply. You should explain that while it's great she has lots of ideas, you should suggest setting clear goals and deadlines. Totally true. Totally true. And we do that. We play with this a lot, so we make sure that we're using it. So you can see this AI sitting in a tool. Now, one of the things I'm going to end on is another tool is not what you need, right? You've all got, I think the average global corporation has 200 applications sitting on the desktop available to anyone to use because they really want to use another application. Let's go into this management tool. So actually you want to be in the flow of work. We want to be in line with work using this. So we're extracting as we speak, and the architect of that is Dr. Luke Treglown, who's the guy in the t-shirt at the back. He'll be speaking tomorrow. Luke is going to share with that, but we've extracted it and we're placing it in where you work. So that will be in Slack and in Teams and in Zoom and anywhere else. So when somebody's about to have a meeting and they want to be guided, it gives them some tips on how to build better connection in real time. So it'll allow them to either prepare properly, take a breath, or be there in real time. And when they want to dip in and do a performance appraisal, they want all of the detail, they can come back into the app. But what you don't want to do is force yet another application on every staff member, right? It's just too much overload. We've all got too many things to do. Yes?
So I have a reservation here. It's great to see an opening of AI, but if you're trying to build the capability of your people managers and leaders, this insight, I think, has to be positioned as a tip, as a contributor.
Correct.
To great preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, a short of time people manager or leader, or maybe 20% who aren't particularly interested, will do this 60 seconds before a meeting without building their internal capability.
I think that's very true. And I think what we're trying to do is, so Luke will talk to you about the philosophies of AI. So we've done two things. First of all, we're the world's first, and Luke can talk again tomorrow, to work with Databricks in constraining this level of content. We've got millions and millions of rows and 40 years of content that have gone into it. And we won't allow any hallucinations. There's no other data in apart from the data that we provide. And Luke's constrained what it can and can't guide. So if I asked a question, how do I sack Jenny? It would reject that question out of hand and say, you need to look at yourself in the mirror and know, what have you failed first as a manager? What haven't you? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this before trying to do it? Because, you know, Luke, we're on time. Yeah, this is, So we'll constrain it. And the other thing is they are tips, right? They're not designed to replace the human. We had a big constraint about agency. So we said the most important thing is if we assume AI is going to be so disruptive, if we make it do the thinking, all of the thinking, we'll all become reliant and lazy. So the tips are designed to be steers and guides. I still have to think quite hard with that input. I can't just walk in and go, right, I need to think of a decision-making process. Oh, I'm going to just go in and do that on the fly. Some of us are good, but not that good, right? So I think the idea is it's creating a lens that says, look at the other individual. As we mature it and as we add in connection, we're going to add in other tips and guides, and then we're going to put them in the places. And we have an idea of tips in real time being short, very, very short, and tips in planning cycle being much more in depth to give people an opportunity to prepare. So it depends on where you see it, what length you'll get, what guide. So we don't get lazy people, we get thinking people. It's about using AI to create agency, not to take it away. It's a brilliant, brilliant fair challenge, actually. Thank you. I think that, we have questions. Have we got time for questions, Christian, or do we need to wrap? One more.
Yeah, for me, just to counter that a little bit, I do feel as well that companies are getting more lean and lean, and we all know the stress on our resources. What I felt that AI can be is sort of a brainstorming partner. So I see it a little bit differently in the sense that I know myself quite well. Doesn't mean I know my colleagues really well. So when in a conversation, in a meeting, I hit a struggle, I get a feeling they're not getting it or they're not getting annoyed maybe even, I actually could ask this to hey, give me some quick tips instead of going my go-to reaction, which is quite direct. I think I fit in quite well. It can make me pause and reflect and not let things escalate. So I see it as part of working tool, even if you can multitask at least, and in digital meetings it's a bit easier.
Yeah. That
you could actually have this open during your meeting.
I'll be honest, we do. We have it often. If the meetings aren't going quite to plan, I'm trying to work out, I really have an agenda, I'd like to make something happen. But it's normally, how do I make it happen where that person feels control over that, right? So I have a CHRO in my business, and she's a very thoughtful person. She's very reflective, she's very detail focused, and she's exceptionally bright. But she doesn't work at my pace. She goes away and she considers and she reflects and she gives me a better solution. So now, as a result of working with her over the last year with the tool, I've modified completely. So every time we have a meeting, which is weekly, I send her an agenda. I don't normally do that. So she knows what's coming, so she prepares something. And then I'll say, look, I've had a couple of crazy ideas, because that's pretty standard. And can you tell me if any of these work? How long do you need? So she'll say, I need 3 days, 4 days, whatever. Much less time than I would to process it. And she'll say, I'll go through and I'll work through which ones are the right idea. And she'll come back to me probably early, because she's very conscientious. And she'll give me a solution that isn't either of the ideas I had, but it's a considered one that she owns that's better than either of mine, because she's had time to reflect. And so she's super engaged. If you look at her engagement versus working for a hairdryer who's just, constantly blasting, she's not having to receive that now because I've had to modify for her good. She's now happier and we're getting much more results as a company. So I don't think there's any trickery in that. That's actually just genuinely respectful, and it works very well. Look, we're totally at time. I think we're a couple of minutes over. Thank you for your patience today and for your company. We look forward to getting to know you over the next couple of days. Jenny, thank you. And pass on to the next speaker. Thank you.